Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack something truly fascinating and honestly pretty often misunderstood. We are diving into the intersection of the Genesis creation account and modern scientific discovery. Now, we all know we're tackling a heavily debated topic here, but our goal today is just to lay out the raw materials for you. We're going to look at the text, the science, and the scholarly frameworks to help you understand how these two massive, distinct streams of human knowledge can actually speak to one another. Let's start by grounding our explainer in the sheer poetic beauty of the source text. You see, the writers of the biblical texts described the universe using phenomenological language. That means they were describing the cosmos exactly as it appeared to the naked eye, with a deep sense of awe. Psalm 104, for example, depicts God stretching out the heavens like a tent, setting the earth on its foundations, and watering the mountains. And recognizing this beautiful broad brushstroke poetry is absolutely essential before we can even begin to compare it to a modern science textbook. So, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover general versus special revelation, the underlying literary structure of Genesis, the meaning of the Hebrew word yom, the actual scientific data, and finally, how scholars synthesize faith and science. All right, let's jump into Section 1, General versus Special Revelation, the two books. The foundational premise of our source material here is that both the natural world and the scriptures must be taken exceedingly seriously as distinct messages from God. Imagine them as two books. General revelation is what we observe in the natural world, right? The vast reaches of space, quantum particles, the geological layers deep beneath our feet. Special revelation, on the other hand, encompasses the specific words and structures found in the biblical text. The real challenge, and honestly the beauty of this whole topic, is learning how to read both of these books without ignoring the profound truths each one offers. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. We absolutely have to avoid an apples and oranges comparison. People frequently pit the Bible directly against science, but that's a huge category error. The actual text of the Bible and the measurable data of the natural world, those are our raw facts. Theology and science, however, are the human theories used to interpret those facts. Just keeping that conceptual distinction in mind drastically lowers the temperature of the whole debate. Moving right along to Section 2, the structure of Genesis, poetry and framework. To really understand the text, we have to start with the word Genesis itself. It actually comes from the Greek translation of the Hebrew word toledot, which means the account of or beginnings. The ancient authors were focused on providing a broad brush understanding of origins to answer the big questions, the who and the why, much more than the precise mechanical how. And think about this for a second. Modern astrophysics tells us that a measly 4.6% of the created order is currently observable to us. That means the vast majority of our universe is made up of completely unobservable dark matter and dark energy. So when you're dealing with a universe that is 95% invisible, it makes perfect sense that ancient texts utilized profound poetry, analogies, and divine words to describe realities that totally transcend our physical limitations. Just look at the visual symmetry of Genesis 1. Far from being some random list of events, the text is meticulously organized. Notice how the structural frameworks, or kingdoms, created on the first 3 days are perfectly populated by the kings, the inhabitants of the next 3 days. Day 1 separates light and darkness. Day 4 gives us the sun, moon, and stars to rule them. Day 2 separates waters and sky, and Day 5 fills them with fish and birds. Day 3 brings dry land and vegetation, and Day 6 populates it with animals and humans. It is literally a stunning, poetic theological statement of bringing order out of chaos. Okay, let's head into Section 3, the meaning of yom, time in the text. Now, when people argue about Genesis, it almost always boils down to this one Hebrew word, yom, which our English Bibles translate as day. But here's the thing. Yom doesn't strictly mean a 24-hour block of time. In fact, if you skip over to Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, that exact same word, yom, is used to describe the entire overarching period of creation, the whole span of the heavens and the earth being made. It's used in the same conversational way we might say back in my grandfather's day. It can totally represent a long, undefined period of time. And check out this massive clue right at the end of the creation account. The first 6 days all end with this rhythmic closing phrase, and there was evening and there was morning. But the seventh day, the day of God's rest, it lacks this concluding phrase entirely. Because of this, many scholars, drawing on other biblical texts like Hebrews chapter 4, suggest that we might actually still be living within this incredibly long extended seventh day. It could be a massive epic where God is currently resting from initial creation and actively sustaining the universe. Which brings us to Section 4. The scientific data. scale, and scope. So let's transition to the general revelation of nature. Look at this awe-inspiring astronomical object located within our own Milky Way. It is 2,600 light-years away, and incredibly, astrophysicists consider that to be practically right next door. The sheer scale of space is just mind-blowing, and it constantly forces us to expand our mental frameworks. Because we are dealing with an incredibly vast scale here. Based on rigorous astronomical measurements of light travel time and the accelerating expansion of the cosmos, the data indicates a universe that is over 13 billion years old. That means the light from distant galaxies has been traveling for billions of years just to reach our telescopes today. And we see this deep time right down here on Earth, too. Take specific geological evidence like the Green River formations in Wyoming. They contain what geologists call varves. These are sedimentary deposits where seasonal color changes from spring to winter leave a literal measurable timeline right in the rock. In just that one location, there are 7.5 million years of history, measurable simply through these continuous seasonal layers. It's like counting tree rings, but for millions of years. When looking at biology, the source importantly distinguishes between two things: microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution refers to observable, naturally selected adaptations within a species, think changes in skin color or beak size. Macroevolution, on the other hand, implies major, system-wide species jumps over vast periods of time. While the fossil record shows an incredibly long history, scholars note that it can still appear intermittent in places, which leaves plenty of room for robust scientific and philosophical debate on the exact mechanisms of these larger jumps. But you know what's really fascinating? The biblical text doesn't actually shy away from biological commonality at all. In fact, it anticipates it. Genesis uses the exact same Hebrew term, nefesh hayah, which translates as living creature, to describe both human beings and creeping land animals. The ancient text actively points out that we share a fundamental, earthly biological baseline with the animal kingdom, and that aligns beautifully with modern discoveries of our highly shared DNA. Finally, let's bring it all together in Section 5, Synthesizing Faith and Science, Modern Frameworks. First off, we need to understand how the word myth is used in academia. It doesn't mean a falsehood or a fake story. It signifies a highly structured narrative designed to convey profound universal truths, rather than a scientifically factual historical account. Under this framework, some scholars view Genesis not as a material timeline, but as a deeply intentional theological statement about a purposeful God bringing order. So, here are the specific models scholars use to respect both sets of data impartially, harmonizing that ancient text with a billions of years old universe. Theistic evolution proposes that God is the ultimate beginner who designed the universe so perfectly from the start that evolutionary processes were actually the divine mechanism for unfolding life. Progressive creationism, on the other hand, embraces the ancient age of the earth, but suggests that God directly intervened to create new life forms at key points over those long, undefined yom periods. But here is the ultimate takeaway from the source material. Regardless of which exact timeline or mechanism you lean towards, the Genesis narrative makes one singular, unparalleled distinction. The creation of humanity involves the direct implantation of the breath of God. So while we absolutely share a biological baseline with other living creatures, this divine breath imparts a profound, intrinsic, and sacred value to human life that is entirely unique. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. If the days of Genesis are vast epochs, and we are indeed still living within the immense span of God's seventh day, a day of divine rest and providential sustaining, what is our role in this continuously unfolding universe? As we synthesize the stunning poetry of the ancient world with the mind-bending reality of modern astrophysics, how does that reframe your understanding of our place in the cosmos today? Thank you so much for exploring with us, and keep seeking the truth in both the text and the stars.